Hey everyone, Xyronic here. Welcome to Team Liquid's Boss Strategy Guide powered by Alienware. Be sure to check out tl.gg/alienware to see what the guild uses to raid, and keep an eye out for some awesome gear giveaways during the race. Today we'll be going over the Heroic Midnight Falls or Heroic Lura encounter, the last boss of the tier and the last boss of March on Quel'Danas here. This is a single target boss a majority of the time, where all damage matters and phases are based off of time. So of course you're gonna be blusting on pull, popping all your cooldowns, doing as much damage as possible. Now, right off the bat, 10 seconds into the encounter, we have the premier mechanic that everyone's talking about, the memory game, also known as Death Stirge. So I'm gonna run through the mechanic first, and then I'll tell you the best solution that we've figured out how to deal with this mechanic as a raid. So, the boss will start flashing symbols, 5 of them in a row, about 1.5 seconds each. T, X, triangle, circle, and diamond. After it's flashed these 5 symbols, it'll then place 5 symbols on 5 members of your raid. And then after about 5 more seconds, it'll start casting Death Stirge, which is a beam that will start on the tanks and spin clockwise around the boss. It needs to hit the 5 markers in the same order that they appeared on the boss frame about 20 seconds ago. If you don't, it'll kill your entire raid. So, our solution to best deal with this mechanic is to have 5 extremely trusted members of your raid, each responsible for 1 marker. So you have 5 markers. You have cross is X, triangle is triangle, diamond is diamond. The moon/circle marker is your circle marker. And then the only weird one is T, which we're using square for. As a player, it is your job to always place one of the same markers. So let's say, for example, let's say Fired Up places the square marker, THG places the red marker, etc., etc. You always place the same marker. So you look at the memory game, you find out what position your marker is in, and you place your markers here. So for example, we see T first here. They're going to place their square marker in the top right position. X marker, bottom right position. Triangle marker, behind the raid. Circle, bottom left. And diamond, top left. Now, all the rest of your raid has to do when the markers come out is match the color. And that's it. As long as the people that are assigned to place down markers are paying attention whenever the memory game goes out, the rest of your raid can just hard focus on doing damage as much as possible. Now, the other most difficult portion of this phase is these Heaven's Glaives mechanics that come out 3 times throughout the phase. 6 glaives will spawn around the boss, like so, in a hexagon pattern, and they will go out from the boss in a direct line. So, straight this way, etc. The most dangerous part of this mechanic is the initial shootout from the boss. This initial shootout from the boss is incredibly fast and will one-shot you. As long as you dodge that initial wave, this mechanic will not kill you. You can get hit by any of these slowly moving glaives throughout the phase. It'll hit for about 100k per tick. You can see Fired Up walks right through it here, takes about half his HP in damage. As long as you don't get hit by the initial wave of those, you'll be okay. There's one last mechanic in this phase we haven't covered yet, which is the Safeguard Prism. This is a multi-tiered mechanic, so let's go over it a little quickly here. You can see that when these shields spawn, they have about 15 debuffs on them total. You need to interrupt or CC these shields with essentially every single CC utility you have in the book. Each CC will remove 1 stack of the debuff, and whenever all the stacks of the debuff are gone, they'll despawn. Now, there's a little bit of bug of this mechanic on day 1. I'm not sure if this is intended or when it will be fixed, but a monk casting Paralyze on one of these shields will just completely remove it from the encounter. It'll get rid of all the debuffs and despawn the ad. So it's a quick way to get rid of them instantly. So they're not actually doing that here. They're just doing it the correct way. But that is a useful tip for people progressing on this fight while that's still in the game. Now, when you've dealt with all 3 of the safeguard shields, a number of crystals will spawn. Now, there's two different types of crystals. There's these midnight crystals that have about 6 million HP each. This scales with your raid size, so it might be a little lower for you if you're not a 30-man raid. And there's also these dusk crystals. Midnight crystals need to be DPS down before their cosmic fracture cast ends. Dusk crystals need to be healed up. These dusk crystals and these midnight crystals can both be moved by certain abilities. So obviously DKs can death grip the midnight crystals on top of the boss to make it easier for your raid to AoE them down. Dusk crystals can be rescued or life gripped to put them in a better spot, or stack them up so that your raid is more aware of where they are. Once the crystals are AoE'd on top of the boss, they'll be removed from the encounter. If they do get a fracture cast off, it does a large amount of dot damage to your raid over the course of like 10 seconds. You can live through one of the midnight crystals fracturing, two of them not so much. Now, these dusk crystals, the healer crystals, are incredibly important for the rest of the fight. They are essentially going to be a mechanic you deal with for the rest of the fight. So again, make sure you have a couple of the most trusted members of your raid to pick up these dusk crystals, because they are going to be nursing that dusk crystal for the entire fight. These are going to be your seed mechanic from Farak back in the day. These players are going to hold this crystal for the rest of the fight. They're going to save it for a certain time in P3 where it needs to be used to save the raid. Now, these dusk crystals have an extra added mechanic to them. Whenever somebody holding a dusk crystal takes any avoidable cosmic damage, so that'll be glaives moving around the platform in P1, that'll be getting hit by the beam from the Death Scourge mechanic if you have one of the circles, that'll be getting hit by pretty much any mechanic in phase 2 or phase 3, you will spawn 2 circles on the ground that need to be soaked by your raid. But then after dealing with the crystals, we're back to the same rotation of mechanics here, back to another memory game. 5 marks come out, 5 marks go down from those 5 players who are assigned to put down world markers. And then of course, you just match the shapes here. Circle and triangle are a little lost here. That can happen. Again, when you're only assigning 5 players to look at the memory game, sometimes it can be a little hard to color associate, but we get it correct here. You have a little bit of time before that Death Scourge cast goes out to get in the right position. And we do get all 5 of those markers resolved in the correct way. Another set of glaives, into another set of beams from the boss. These can go either clockwise or counterclockwise, so pay attention. Make sure you don't get hit by the initial sweep of that beam. And there are a few different ways that I've seen guilds set up for the boss. Liquid's preferred way of dealing with their positioning for the memory mechanic is to just position opposite of the boss from their tanks. But I've seen guilds that prefer to have their tanks towards the inside and their guild toward the outside of the room. Do whatever makes sense for you. Another safeguard into another set of crystals. Again, DKs grip them on top of the boss, cleave them down with the grip before the cosmic fracture goes off. And then we have another set, this time of 3 dusk crystals that the healers need to top up. We've got 2 in the right corner here, 1 in the bottom corner here. These will also need to be picked up by 3 further players. So you'll have 5 total dusk crystals on members of your raid that will be carrying those for the rest of combat. For Liquid here, they've got both of their Devourer Demon Hunters, fired up, THD, and Atlas all carrying one of those dust crystals. One final memory game goes out at the end of the phase, into one more Death Scourge, which procs the memory phase. One last set of glaives are going to come out afterwards that you have to dodge. Again, if your dust crystal holders get hit by these glaives, they will spawn circles that you'll have to soak. We're seeing almost perfect play here from Liquid to not get hit by any of those extra mechanics. And then after that final set of glaives, we go into the intermission. Very reminiscent of Nexus Princess Skyvesa for Beck and Nerebar Palace, if you remember that. Everything goes dark. You have to dodge a lot of lines. Make sure you're very spread out over the room here. Liquid is almost covering, if you look up here on the right corner, they're covering almost an entire semicircle of the room, almost half of the room. So spread out a lot, give people a lot of room to dodge here. Every person in the raid is guaranteed to at least one time get this hexagonal line mechanic. It's important to mention that if you are a carrier of the Dusk Crystal, you will get hit by this one time. Now, what you can do as a Dusk Crystal holder is you can place down the Dusk Crystal, move off to the side a little bit, let your hexagonal line mechanic dodge. This is an example of a Dusk Crystal getting hit here. You have 2 circles per Dusk Crystal hit that you have to soak. These will do a large amount of raid damage if they do not get soaked. little scary there, but they're able to make it work. You can drop that dust crystal, move off to the side a little bit, let your mechanic go off, then move back and pick it up. You have about 3 seconds to leave the dust crystal on the ground before it starts pulsing for raid damage. So that's something that you can do, but you can also just let yourself get hit. Let people know in advance, hey, I'm about to get hit. If I'm a dust crystal holder, be ready to soak these circles. Just make sure your raid is prepared. And with that, we're into phase 2. Now, if you're somebody who raided last tier, this phase probably looks eerily familiar to you. It kind of is, but it works a little differently. So there's 12 of these rotating void orbs throughout the room. I'm gonna let the phase play out and go over the cadence of mechanics first, and then I'll show you guys a raid plan for how we've dealt with this boss. So here's the mechanics. First, 4 galvanized beams will come out. These are targeting 1 tank, 1 melee, 1 healer, and 1 ranged. So you always know where you can go. We have the 4 groups set up into a ranged group, a tank group, a melee group, and a healer group. And since the raid comp has so many more extra ranged than every other mechanic, the ranged are a little bit more spread out into the groups. What you want to do is you want to hit 2 opposite sets of orbs. So the more people that soak the beams, the less raid damage you take. Liquid is opting to not have their seeds soak the beams. Probably smart to make sure you don't take any extra raid damage, but if you're in a smaller raid size, you can do the same thing I was talking about the intermission, where you drop the seed, go soak a beam, and then go pick it back up afterwards. Either way, after you have dealt with the galvanized beams, they will then go back into the boss. Simply enough, just dodge. And then it's 2 more sets of the same mechanics. Another set of galvanized beams. Make sure you hit the orbs, make sure you soak. Raid takes a bunch of damage from those galvanized beams. This is a major personal / raid cooldown section of the fight where you want to use AMZ or any other raid cooldowns to keep the raid topped. And then of course, after a couple Heaven's Lances on the tanks, another set of galvanized beams back to the boss, harvest those cores. And then finally, the last set of galvanized beams dealing with the last 4 orbs. If you ever miss an orb, it's essentially a wipe. You need to deal with all 12 of the orbs to get out of the phase. So it's important that you hit those orbs every time and everyone makes sure they're on the same page. So that was a little confusing, so let me bring up a raid plan to show you exactly the best way to deal with this mechanic. So there's 2 markers that you can place down on the almost the exact west, exact east. You can also move these markers around after a pull if they're not quite online. But we've got that healer group on the circle marker. You'll probably actually want to use the skull marker because you're using the circle marker for the memory game. So let's actually do that. So healers on the skull marker, ranged on the star marker. Tanks are going to be 1 ahead of the ranged, and melee are going to be 1 ahead of the healers. The idea here is that you get 2 exact across sets of 2 next to each other. And if you're able to do this, it's extremely easy to deal with the next couple sets of galvanized beams. People don't have to guess about where they're going. Between the first and second galvanize, the orbs will rotate about halfway across the room. So if you're somebody that's soaking on skull, you can stay around skull for the rest of the phase. If you're somebody on star, you can stay around star for the rest of the phase. For the second set of galvanized beams, it's going to be a little bit offset. You'll want to make sure you're in that same position. So healers closer to the marker. Again, that's a skull marker. Range closer to the star marker. Melee on the leading orb, tank on the leading orb. Again, just hitting both of the leading orbs here. And then again, between the second and the third galvanize, it's actually a little less than half. So imagine this rotated anti-clockwise instead of clockwise, or rather clockwise instead of anti-clockwise. And with only 4 orbs left, it should be easy to get these last couple of beams in. Now with that, we've finished phase 2, and we are heading into the final phase, which is very similar to Farak back in the day. Make sure everyone is stacked on the same side of the room so everyone gets knocked in the same direction into phase 3. Those seeds will land on the ground. If you're not somebody assigned to soak the seed, make sure you don't pick it up. Let the people that are assigned to hold seeds pick those up. In this entire last phase, you need to make sure you're within the light aura of one of those seeds. If you're not within the aura of one of those seeds, you get a stacking debuff, as you can see on members of the raid here. Not good. The boss will start a phase by casting an entire raid-wide nuke, which will need to be neutralized with one of these seeds, the Dark Archangel. Fired up here, uses the extra action button on a seed, drops that safe zone for his team, just like Farak back in the day. Neutralizes that AoE damage of the Dark Archangel, and they quickly move out of the raid to get away from that big frontal cone that the boss spawns. Next mechanic you'll have to deal with are 3 circle soaks. Best way we've determined to come up with this mechanic, save this mechanic, is there's an inner circle, a middle circle, and an outer circle. Just make sure your raid is split into 3 so that you can soak these mechanics evenly. These work similar to the phase 1 mechanic on Dominsius, where you have to soak a certain amount of damage on the circle before it goes away. It's important that your seeds spread out between these 3 circles so that people have a safe spot to stand and the debuff doesn't start to stack up on them in this phase. This is kind of going to be one of the more difficult mechanics to deal with later in the fight if your boss isn't as low as Liquid's this year. So make sure your seeds know where they're going to go in advance to soak these circles. At the same time, these constellations will form. You need to make sure you're not standing in the circle, and you're not also standing between the circles, because these beams, as you can see for Fired Up here, will one-shot you. If you're somebody who is a seed holder and you do die, make sure somebody is there to back up your seed and pick it up as soon as possible so that doesn't start pulsing damage on your raid. I've found that if you're standing in the middle of these circles, constellation beams don't tend to go there. So you should be good to go to dodge those beams if you're in the middle of the circle. After a few sets of constellations and the circles are soaked, the boss will once again restart the phase with another Dark Archangel cast. Unfortunately here, another seed gets hit by some cosmic damage, forcing the members of the raid to have to soak the circles, but they're able to get all the soaks and keep the raid alive. Once again, another Dark Archangel cast, which needs to be canceled by one of the seed presses. And the phase continues and recycles. Fortunately for Liquid, the boss is low enough here that that's the end of the fight for them. But you can see how this phase could go on and get harder longer as you get fewer and fewer seeds spread out over the course of the room. And eventually, when you run out of seeds for Dark Archangel casts, you will just wipe. But that's it for Midnight Falls. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you have.